Hi everyone, we're back with another amazing guests. Today we are joined by the fabulous John Pring. Hey John. How you doing?
Hello, hello. That's thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on. So you I think I'll get you to introduce yourself because there's so many things that you're working on and accolades and things that you get on with. So I think the best thing to do is just ask you to introduce yourself. And if you're comfortable, just spotlighting your disability.
Yeah, sure. So I run Disability News Service, which is a um, it's a news agency that obviously specializes on disability issues, and I've been doing that for about 15 years now. So I've got the website, which is disabilitynewsservice.com, and send those stories out every Thursday. Just about now, actually, they've just gone on my website literally in the last hour. Some interesting ones this week. So I've been doing that about 15 years, and I've been a journalist for about, what is it now? 30 years, I think. Yeah, about 30 years I've been a journalist for. And I started in local papers, regional papers, freelanced, and then I ended up on Disability Now magazine. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which it doesn't go anymore, but I was there for on and off for about 8, 9 years, and then set up DNS after I got made redundant. Um, and yeah, as to I've got a book coming out later this year about my ongoing investigations into the Department for Work and Pensions, and it's links with, well, countless deaths of benefit claimants. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit more later. So
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and I'm yeah you my own impairment. I'm autistic. Um, Fairly recent diagnosis. I'd always considered myself to have, someone with kind of long-term experience of mental distress. And it's only in kind of recent years that it started to dawn on me that I was actually autistic, and I've finally got a diagnosis last year, which I just found incredibly helpful. Um, just kind of like a weightlifting, suddenly everything made sense. Well, not everything, not everything
Yeah,
makes sense, but because I haven't really lived a typical life, and it did help to make sense of some of those aspects of my life that I just found pretty confusing, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's always the sort of like double-edged sword, isn't it? Like you know something's up, and then you're diagnosed. You find out you have autism. You think, okay, that's disabilities. Yeah, depending on how you look at them. Like, yeah, some people are fine with it, but other people are like, oh, I'd rather not have a disability. But then at the same time, like you said, to have that place to point to where you can be like, okay, that's what the situation is. It makes things little bit clearer, doesn't it? It's like you know where
Mm.
things stand, and then at that point, there's support that's around that to potentially look at down that line, so you can think, oh, okay, that's what it is. I can start, putting answer to the questions I've always had.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I've found it's helped with not beating up on myself so much about some of those things that I have struggled with, you know, socializing, relationships. I've had my obsessions, my rigid routines, my kind of sensitivities, and all those kind of things. I mean, I spent, God, 10, 15 years on my first book, which was out, about 10, 12 years ago now. And I've spent pretty much the last decade working on the new book. And that's not really typical behavior, being so obsessed with something to that degree. Um, and so, yeah, it's definitely helped. Much more comfortable, I think, now with myself, now that I can, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So we just dive back a little bit because I would like to ask you
Mm,
obviously about Disability News Service.
mm,
Um,
sure.
you said you'd been made redundant from your previous job. Is that what inspired you to want to sort of carry on with that sort of like news outlet, if you like?
Yeah, yeah, because I've been at Disability Now magazine for quite a few years. Uh, I, I'd been acting editor, and then at the end I was deputy editor. and I was made redundant. And I knew the focus of Disability Now had kind of increasingly become about comment and features, and there wasn't really a media organization out there that was really focusing on disability related news. So I saw a gap, and reporting and investigation, that was my strength rather than comment and features and stuff. So I looked into whether that was something I could do myself, and I launched it in, what was it, April 2009, and it kind of built gradually after that. Because I still wish today that more of the disabled journalists out there were interested in the news side of things rather than comment and features, because without the news, what is there to comment on?
Yeah.
So how is it that you go about choosing the news stories you want to cover?
Oh, okay. So, well, I always try and make sure I've got kind of 2 or 3 investigative type stories on the go that I can get my teeth into on the Friday, that's kind of the first day of my new week, as it were. A lot of them are kind of based on hunches or responses to, I make a lot of freedom of information requests, particularly for the government. But a lot of them are from emails or phone calls I've had from disabled people. And also, there are big announcements, often big government announcements, but I have to, I try and put my own angle on those announcements, and it's usually something I've spotted that doesn't seem quite right, often because it's something I've covered before, and I realise the government is not being straight about its past actions or inactions more often, and it's really important to get disabled people's views on those issues and on those announcements. And that, I think, is one of the kind of things that Disability News Service does that other people don't do. So if we had, for instance, we had the Disability Action Plan last week that Deepak has called the Disability Inaction Plan.
Yeah.
And we had it was out one day, and then all the big disability charities got their press offices into gear and got their statements out there, and that's what appeared in the newspapers the next day. And disabled people's views weren't heard.
Yeah.
So, I was able to talk to my contacts, and we had the grassroots groups and the disabled people's organisations gave their comments on it, and that way, Disability News Service was able to do something different and something important and amplify the voices of disabled people. So that's, yeah.
Because it's a website and obviously you need to drive traffic, do you ever feel like you have a bit of a vested interest to pick stories that are a bit more like clickbaity, basically? Like
sensationalist.
Maybe pull in people, your audience, effectively. And are they more sort of geared towards that slant, as in maybe disabled people have quite a rough time of whatever the story is about, and it's more slanted towards, well, you said it's more slanted towards people with disabilities views, but do you feel that they're balanced?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question, because fortunately not all my revenue comes from the website. A bit of it does, kind of indirectly, because people kindly make give financial support. There's a link at the bottom for donations, which is quite common. But I also have organizations that subscribe, and I send them my stories out a few hours before they get on the website every week. Most of them are disabled people's organizations, and a lot of them have supported me for about 10 years now. And that's absolutely crucial as well. So it means that I've constantly got in my head, right, don't just do what is going to be popular on Twitter, X, refuse to call it X, and other social media. Do what you think disabled people need to hear and what these organizations need to know about as well. So like the important stuff. But yeah, there's such a pressure to do clickbaity stuff, and hopefully I resist it. But I'm sure I slip into that occasionally. I'm sure I do. But I try not to. Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really important.
Yeah, the reason I ask is we have a we just have a very small feature on our show a lot of the time called Quick Blind News, where we'll just look through some headlines of sort of disabled news that's gone on in the area.
Yeah.
And as I was looking through them, I actually came across Disability News Service, and that's where I found it. And then we ended up actually speaking about one of the articles that's seen on there with the DWP looking into, well, potentially looking into the bank accounts of people that are on benefits.
Oh yeah, the snooping story. Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously that was quite heavily weighted towards disabled people. Do you think more people are bound to read that if it's geared towards them? Because I think that the whole snooping thing is for everyone on benefits, isn't it? Regardless of benefit.
Yeah, it won't just be about disabled people. It will. I mean, we still haven't got to the bottom of exactly what they're going to do if these laws come in. I mean, there may still change as it's going through Parliament. So we still haven't quite got to the bottom of that story. But yeah, I've forgotten your question now. I'm sorry.
No, I just guess it's more geared towards disabled people. I get that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a bit scaremongery? I guess that's what
I
can't think of a nice way around it. Yeah, those sorts of things.
I don't think it was, because it was and it was shared much and read much more than I expected. I did not expect that to be the big story that week, but it really took off. It surprised me very much, actually.
Yeah.
But was it? No, I don't think so, because it was based on things that on research that other organisations had done. Both disabled people's grassroots groups have been raising concerns about this for a long time, but also groups like it's Big Brother Watch, I think, isn't it? That's taken the lead on the campaigning on this. So no, if it was just me just kind of sitting at my keyboard saying, oh, that's going to be awful, it's going to be horrific, and they're going to see how much you spend on chicken every week, or see how many toilet rolls you buy every week, or whatever. Because I don't, we still don't know in what detail they're going to go into. But yeah, if it had just been me looking at something and saying, yeah, this is shocking, I'm going to make this sound really shocking, then you're right. But it wasn't, and it was very much based on concerns that have been raised by other organisations, and over a long period of time as well. This has been simmering away for a long time, this story, and it's going to continue, I think, into the next government, whoever that might be. And I think it will probably be a Labour government, and I'm not sure whether Labour will have the guts to bin it if they come in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember reading through the article, we did the episode on it, and I really appreciated the fact that you have clearly got sources there, and you're doing your due diligence and pulling from various sources, which I think is so important in any of sort of journalism altogether, like getting multiple sources and like you said, like what was put out. I think one of my summaries of our discussion on this topic was, well, we'll see what happens, but it was just the broadness of it and the unknown details of that particular case. It's like, well, it says this, we're speculating on a lot of this, but we have no idea what they're going to do with potential power that might be given to them. It's a bit in the unknown, sort of. We don't know what's going to happen.
I think that's a fair criticism. Although in this case, we're talking about the Department for Work and Pensions, and it's also important to bear in mind that I've been investigating the Department for Work and Pensions over the last 10 years, and I trust very little of anything that comes out of that department, because I know that they've sometimes they've lied, sometimes they've delayed stuff, they've obfuscated, they've made it incredibly difficult to find out what they're doing, and they have covered up. They've covered up deaths. They've covered up investigations into deaths. So I'm afraid I don't really trust them. And I think that is the core of what a lot of disabled people will be thinking right now. Right, this is the Department for Work and Pensions. They're asking for these sweeping new powers. Well, should we trust them? I mean, the government, we should trust the government. But then I think, well, this is the Department for Work and Pensions, and we know we can't trust them because we have 10 years of facts to show we can't trust them. And that's why my book is, maybe talk about it in a bit, but why my book is, I'm so comfortable with it coming out. I'm not worried about it at all because it's all based on facts. It's all based on documents and documentary evidence. So this isn't just me ranting about DWP saying, I can't trust them, they're awful, you know, they never give disabled people the right benefits, whatever. It's just facts. It's just documented evidence and investigations that have, and it's their own reports. I've got documents. I won't talk too much about this, but I've got documents from the 1990s that play a big part in the book. So you'll be able to follow the timeline of what's happened with the old DSS, the old Department of Social Security that came with DWP.
Yeah.
You better see how it kind of grew slowly, that the harm grew slowly over the years until it kind of exploded in the post-2010 years under austerity. And so, yeah, I completely understand why people are concerned about this, because at the moment, I'm afraid we can't trust DWP.
Yeah.
It's horrible to say that, but it's just true.
Yeah.
In your opinion, do you think those things that happen within the DWP affect the greater disabled community, or is it just a lot of isolated? Well, can't be a lot of isolated incidents, but is it a series of isolated incidents?
Well, it's definitely systemic because it happens so much, and because there's evidence, and because there's proof of cover-ups. I mean, there's proof because they give one example. They set up their own independent reviews of the work capability assessment, and then didn't give the independent reviewer their own secret reviews into deaths that were linked to the work capability assessment. I mean, if that's not cover up, then what is?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, absolutely. And we'll touch more in your book in a second. I think we've just got a couple more questions about DNS. I suppose one thing that I would like to know, like, of course, you've been a journalist, like you said, 30 years, been doing DNS for 15 years now. I mean, have you found that there's been any sort of barriers in place because of your disability or your like credibility in the field with other journalists? Like I've heard from others that it can be a bit of a viper pit in some situations. Like, have you found that there's been these sort of barriers in place?
What, journalism?
Yeah.
I haven't found that amongst other disabled journalists. I'm glad to say. I think there's quite a lot of camaraderie and solidarity there. I think. I mean, not always, obviously, because we want to get our own stories out there. But I haven't found that so much. But I don't know. I think there's in journalism at the moment, it's pretty difficult to make a living.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And part of that is because the big mainstream organizations are struggling as well. But kind of barriers that I've encountered, I think the barriers I've encountered as an autistic person, in retrospect, thinking back, it's about running a small business that where I've kind of had my issues, because I don't really like to promote myself. You know, networking is my idea of help. I mean, I'm rubbish at marketing. I'm much happy just like burrowing away at my investigations and kind of letting the business take care of itself if it does, as long as I've got enough to, stay where I'm living and heat the place and eat, and put a little bit into a pension or whatever, then that's enough. I mean, I don't, the anxiety side of things, that's played a part, I guess. That's made things interesting every now and again, maybe at big events like the party conferences that I have to go to. That's got a little bit easier since the diagnosis, actually. And there are little things that I ask, for instance, press officers to do, ask them to just acknowledge an email. If I've emailed them and said, look, here are my questions, I just say, can you please just acknowledge this email? It's a very small thing, but like staying on top of the anxieties is like, it's a lot of minor gains, small marginal gains that add up. And believe it or not, DWP is the one government department that's really good on this now. Probably because they deal with me a lot. They do this every time. If I ask them to acknowledge receipt of my email, they do it. Yeah. I mean that, and I have to say, I should say at this point, when I go on and on about the DWP, I do not mean everybody that works in the DWP. There are some brilliant people that work there, and I'm sure a lot of disabled people will be horrified that I say this, but I know because I've come across them over the years. There are some fantastic people that work at DWP that always have done it, and I'm sure that always will. But we're talking about higher levels. We're talking about government ministers. We're talking about senior civil servants, and of course, there are some bad apples at the lower levels as well that people have had to face in job centres and work coaches and things, but a minority. And so I don't want to give the impression that everybody at DWP is engaged in this conspiracy, because that's not the case. It's more about DWP as an organizational body. I think the people that are responsible for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that case, then, shall we move on to the book?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. So it's I mean, I decided to write it. I'd spent about a decade researching deaths caused by DWP, and I started after a lot of the grassroots groups did the initial work on this, did some brilliant research, and I picked up on it quite late. So it wasn't until probably 2012, 2013 that I began to really pick up on this and started asking freedom of information requests, 2013, and started to gradually interview some of the families over the years as well. And so after about nearly a decade of that, it became clear that disabled people were continuing to die, and the DWP was either unable or unwilling to carry out the reforms necessary to make the social security system safe. And I just heard too many distressing, traumatic stories and listened to too many grieving relatives to ignore the story any longer. And I've been involved in a couple of big projects, the Museum of Austerity project, and then later on working with China Mills on the deaths by welfare timeline as well. It kind of gave me both those two things kind of gave me the final push. So you've got to do this. Somebody's got to do it, and it might as well be you, because you're going to be really annoyed if someone else writes this book. So it's really about how the actions of the government department, spurred on by politicians and the outsourcing industry, the Atoses, the Unums, etc., led to hundreds of deaths of disabled people, probably thousands, but I would say hundreds and possibly or probably thousands, because we can prove hundreds. There's evidence for that. But it's also about how the government department, how the DWP covered up their role in these deaths as well. And there's documents I've obtained that show how the violence inflicted kind of built gradually over the years, slowly. And then kind of in that post-2010 austerity period, it really did kind of explode, particularly in those early 2010 to 2015 years, and it's still happening now. Another story today on the same thing, and another tragic death. And I'm reporting today that secretly the government, the DWP, has weakened its guidance on when it investigates suicides of claimants. Secretly, they didn't tell anybody it'd done this. They did this a year after they told the National Audit Office, "Oh no, anytime there's a suicide of a claimant, we will investigate. We'll do one of our internal process reviews. We'll do it every time." And then a year later, without telling anybody, they weakened it, so that doesn't happen anymore. So there are now
Wow.
suicides of claimants that are not being investigated properly by the DWP. So, it continues.
Why do you think that sort of thing happens?
Why does it happen? Do you mean why do you think people die? Or
I mean, why do they sort of weaken their guidelines, for example?
oh,
Is it a
yeah,
lack of
I
funding
don't
and
know.
resources, or?
No, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. I'm sure they'll come up with what they would think of as a rational explanation, but that particular story is too early to know yet at the moment. I think a lot of it is probably political reasons. The cover-ups in the past have been, I think, kind of political, and I think they know best. And there are a number of reasons why they've acted like they do. I think it's quite complex, and I think there's interrelations between like the private sector and the politics of it, because the politics of it became very kind of changed in the 1990s when Labour decided that they needed to do something that proved, New Labour's different. They needed to do something that proved that New Labour was different, and coming down hard on social security claimants was one of the ways that they could do that. Look, see, we're different. We're not old Labour anymore. We're New Labour. We need to come down hard on claimants as well. Now, I don't think I'm not saying that the Labour government was as bad as what we've seen in the last few years, but they've certainly got questions to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently one death from a claimant or any disabled person is too many, and
yeah,
it sounds like you're doing great work, and like even then, like you hear countless stories of the DWP in particular letting people down, like we've spotlighted before when transition to personal independence payment happened and all the issues that went with that, and and all of the craziness that happened at that time. Just overspend, underthink seemed to be the approach at the time. But
yeah, absolutely. I did about a year's worth of stories on PIP when we started to hear. I started to hear like it started with like 2 or 3 emails from disabled people who'd gone through a PIP assessment and said, "Look, this assessor's just lied. They flat out lied. I told them about my impairment and the impact of it, and they reported something completely different in the assessment report."
Yeah.
And I started to think, well, this is like 3 or 4, there's 5 of them now. And it's been about a year. I mean, this wasn't the only thing I did for a year, but it's about a year doing this. And there were so many stories. There were so many stories from people all saying the same. And nearly all of them could evidence it as well. I mean, some of them had recordings, they had video recordings, some of them had audio recordings. But yeah, and if we think things have changed now, I don't want to scaremonger, but I am really concerned about universal credit, and obviously I'm not the only one concerned about it. And I go through periods where I think, oh no, it's a much better system. It's all rolled into one, and it's all, it's going to be online, and it's going to make things so much easier. There's a lot of very serious concerns about the rollout and when it really affects disabled people, when they start transforming, when they start migrating people disabled people on things like ESA onto universal credit. It's just the same complacency, the same secrecy, the same concerns associated with this system as we've had in the past. And we've had, it's probably 3 or 4 suicides now that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's many more. Again, I don't think Labour gets it yet.
Yeah.
Whether they will get it or not, I don't know. But they don't get it yet, that's for sure.
Yeah. Between the book and everything going on, it kind of sounds like you have near enough a national scandal on your hands there.
Well, yeah, but this is the strange thing about this story, is that so many times over the years, I think, all right, okay, this is really going to explode now. And finally, we're going to have like an inquiry. There's going to have to be an inquiry that we've been calling for, myself and others have been calling for several years now. The Nationals will take this up, Labour will take this up, and we'll get changes, and we'll get the changes needed at the DWP, which is not fit for purpose now. And it never happens. It's like maybe a day or two when the mainstream media are exercised about it, and then it just kind of dribbles away. And the closest we came was when that awful case of Errol Graham that I wrote about first, and it got picked up nearly by everybody. He didn't respond to DWP when they asked him to come in for a work capability assessment, and he lived alone in his flat. He cut off his relatives. He wasn't talking to them. He wasn't communicating with them. He was refusing to communicate with them. And DWP basically knew the depths of the struggles, and how his history of mental distress, and they knocked on his door a couple of times. He didn't answer, and they cut off his benefits, and he starved to death over the next few months. I think a lot of people know about this case, and I really thought that one was going to be the one that was going to be the tipping point, and it wasn't. And I just I don't understand it. I really don't. Hope maybe when the book comes out, it will finally be that tipping point. I don't know. There are so many different variables when a book comes out, and no matter how important I think it is, I need variables to go in my favor when it comes out in August.
That was going to be my next question. When was it out?
Oh yeah, it's out in August. We don't actually have a date yet, but it's out in August. It's going to be published by Pluto and Pluto Press, but we don't have a precise date yet. But so now it's in the process of we're in the proofreading stage, copy editing and proofreading, that kind of stage. And I'm thinking about, I'm going to set up a website for the book that'll probably look a little bit like the DNS website, and lots of ideas about some of the things I might do to promote it. So yeah, it's
absolutely. It sounds fantastic, and like this is the sort of work that we've literally just spoken about advocacy and the pros and cons of it, and this is such a big positive
Tangible
move.
as well.
Like, it's so tangible, because that's one of our biggest criticisms of advocacy. It's like the tangibility of a lot of it that you see on social media, and this is like, your book is coming out, and it's we want to see positive change, and hopefully this will be the spark. And at least from the Seesaw side, you're going to have like promotion from us, because this is such an important thing to get out there to everyone. No,
that's great, thank you.
And on the time when your book's out, we'll have you come back on and do
a
deeper dive into it, and then without spoiling the book, of course. We don't want you to
I don't think there'll be any danger of that. There's one or two things maybe I'm keeping close to my chest at the moment, but I think once it's out, I'll be able to talk about pretty much everything, I think. But I do want to stress that there's also, it is kind of going to end on it's not going to end up on a downer note, in that I think it's really important that we do give hope to people that change is possible. And I think a lot of the work from disabled activists and grassroots groups, they've made that change possible. And we have to stay optimistic that we can get some change, particularly in the way our social security safety net is operated. And so, I hope it will end a little bit on a call to arms, maybe, rather than summing up all the desperate, tragic things that have happened over the last 30 years. And that's what terrifies me. 30 years it's been going on. It wasn't as bad as this in the 90s, but it did start to happen in the 90s.
Yeah. No, Absolutely. And yeah, such great work, John. And it's been such a pleasure having you on. And we will be having you back when your book's out later this year. And like in the show notes, we'll have every link to everything you do, and how everyone can support you as well. So
yeah, just before we go, is there anything that you'd like to put out there? Obviously, the DNS website. But
it's pretty much it's disabilitynewsservice.com, and the new stories go on there every Thursday evening. Obviously, it's not behind a paywall, so just go on there. It's free.
Thank you for listening to Seesaw Podcast. Your feedback and comments mean a lot to us, so if you'd like to get in touch, you can do so in the following ways.
You can find us on X at Seesaw Pod, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube at Seesaw Podcast. You can email us at seesawpodcast@gmail.com and you can stream with us live every week on Twitch at Seesaw Podcast.
Remember to like, rate, review and share with a friend.
This podcast was recorded in front of a blind audience.